Violence as a way of achieving justice is both impractical and immoral. It is impractical because it is a descending spiral ending in destruction for all. It is immoral because it seeks to humiliate the opponent rather than win his understanding. It seeks to annihilate rather than convert. Violence is immoral because it thrives on hatred rather than love. It destroys community and makes brotherhood impossible. It leaves society in monologue rather than in dialogue. Violence ends by defeating itself. It creates bitterness in the survivors and brutality in the destroyers. And that was said by Martin Luther King Jr. Welcome to Surviving the Matrix, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Maxwell Igan. It's a pleasure to be with you once again, and I'll be your host for the next hour. Humanity is currently living in very testing times and facing situations where sometimes it may seem that violence is the only option. And yet all that is really needed is to gain a clearer understanding of these times that we actually live in. We're currently living in a time when the entire world has been turned virtually upside down. We live in a world where those who are employed by the people to act on our behalf and according to the best interests of mankind are doing precisely the opposite of that which they are entrusted to do. We live in a world where the value of everything is judged by its economic viability rather than on the benefit it holds for humanity. We live in a world where humanity itself has now become openly enslaved to a system created by humanity, apparently for the benefit of humankind, and where the precarious situation humanity now faces at the hands of the system has been created and is perpetuated simply due to the actions of those persons the people of Earth employ as servants to ensure that the system functions for the benefit of all. And this is an incredibly contradictory situation. Now, I've been attempting to offer this perspective to you for quite some time now, folks. The understanding that every single problem we face as a species can actually be traced to a common cause, and that this cause is that our employees, the group of public trustees we refer to as government and politicians, who are in fact the servants of the people, have worked very hard to turn the tables on their employers in order to elevate themselves to the position where the servants have now taken over the mansion. And they have, folks. The servants have taken over the mansion, and they are working extremely diligently to steal everything they can from the people who employ them. And they're doing this to the detriment of all. Not only to the detriment of the entire human race, but also to the detriment of all life upon the earth, and even to the detriment of the earth itself. Essentially to the detriment of all folks, including themselves. And through conveying this perspective to people, I have also attempted to make it abundantly clear that ultimately the real cause of this situation lies with the failure of the people to face the shadow within themselves. Because it's in facing this inner shadow, in overcoming the fear that each person holds within, that the real remedy lies. Because it is the fear that we all hold within which prevents us from connecting with those around us. And it is this divided state that mankind currently finds itself in that allows the system to continue to function unabated. And the problem is, folks, that up to this point in history, the human race has never truly grown up. We've always allowed someone else to take responsibility for us. And folks, the time for this to change has come. It really has come. It's right here on our doorstep, and we need to grasp the opportunity that it provides for us. With the arrival of practices such as coal seam gas mining and fracking, what we find is that we as a species are being delivered an ultimatum. It's as if consciousness is saying, well, this is it, folks. It's time to now either face your inner fears and to stand up and be counted, or to allow this earth to be turned into a barren wasteland and for all life upon this planet to ultimately perish. That's the situation that we're facing, as painful as it may be for some people to admit. And at this point, we can still turn things around, but it can only be done by the people. It can only be achieved by the people of this earth standing together in mutual respect for each other and viewing our elected servants as the public trustees that we the people employ them to be. And it lies in holding them accountable for their actions. And as I've often said before, folks, I don't even want to jail them. I just want to hold them accountable and offer them an olive branch and an opportunity for them to come home. And we can do this, folks. We can still do it. We still have time. But the time we do have left to accomplish this is growing very short. But in fact, it could be accomplished very easily, because all it would take is a shift in perspective. And actually therein lies the real issue, because affecting positive change is actually the simple part. The real uphill battle lies in people shifting their perspective, because most people are simply too caught up in the daily rigours of collecting enough paper or digital credits to keep their head above the ever-rising waters of perpetual self-generating debt that they're forced to live in at the hands of their servants. And when they do finally get a moment to relax, most people tend to spend as much time as they can simply being programmed into believing the fictional version of reality that's presented to them by their television and the vast propaganda mechanism that lies behind it in the form of the mainstream media. And there are still many others who can see how corrupt the world actually is, but they've been convinced into living their lives in a state of inaction and waiting to be saved by either a saviour, as suggested in most mainstream religions, or by ascension or aliens, as suggested to them by the New Age religions, all of which have been constructed and presented to the world by the very same forces who administer all the media, the monetary system, the corporate-controlled governments, and all the other systems of control that humanity currently finds itself enslaved to. You see, all of these control systems and belief systems are designed to serve a common purpose. That is to create confusion, to remove personal responsibility, and thus eliminate personal power from people, and to keep mankind in a state of fear, division, and inaction, while always expecting salvation to come from an external source, when in reality all that mankind is facing could be very easily healed by simply facing that which lies within, and then standing up to address the situation. And it needs to be addressed calmly, logically, and firmly. Essentially, it can be very simply dealt with by realizing that the perpetrators are in fact public servants, and by addressing the matter from a perspective of trust. It's really as simple as that, folks. To just realize what's happening here is that our employees are acting in breach of trust. They're operating in breach of the trust that's been granted to them by the people. They've been doing so for an extremely long time, and they will continue to do so until mankind stands up to take the matter in hand. And we can take it in hand quite peacefully, folks. We simply have to adjust our perspective of reality and realize that those whom we call government are in fact our employees. They're public trustees that we employ to ensure that we have a viable future. And folks, I would suggest that if you're in a state of debt, or if you're in a state of financial hardship, or you're in risk of losing your house because you haven't paid land tax, or if your country is participating in a war, or if your government is allowing fracking to be carried out in your country, or if your government is simply allowing the perpetuation of a money supply that is based on interest-bearing debt, then I would very much suggest that these are all very, very clear indications that these public trustees are in breach of the trust that we, the public, have given to them. And we don't need to have a violent revolution. We simply need to be aware of the way this world is run and realize that we, the people, hold all the cards. We have the ability to stand up and hold our trustees accountable for their actions if we would simply take the time to look at the situation, and if we could just validate the perspective of others and connect with our neighbours around us and realize that we are all in this together, regardless of your faith, regardless of your social status, regardless of your occupation, regardless of whether you're a policeman or whether you're a hippie. It doesn't matter. You are all subject to the criminality and the corruption that is this system, and that is perpetuated by the politicians, the employees, the public trustees that we appoint to do exactly the opposite of what they are currently doing. And now's the time, folks. Now is the time for us to do it. In fact, there has never been a better time to act than right now. And as I said, folks, it is almost as if nature has delivered us an ultimatum. And so, if we don't act, then the future that we're facing is not a very viable one. So, we're not really left with any choice in the matter if we wish to survive as a species on this planet. And folks, look, I say all of this simply because I believe human consciousness has an extraordinary potential. And I think it would be a real shame if we didn't embrace that potential and if we allowed this program to simply run out. If ultimately the human race self-destructs and we all return to source, then so be it. I'm sure consciousness will create a new reality. But while we still have the potential to save this one, and when salvation is so much within our grasp, if we simply chose to act, then I see no point in wasting the opportunity. We truly do have a world in turmoil, folks. And through all of it, it's very much worth remembering that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And it's very important that we begin to understand this. I mean, we may sit there and argue that humanity deserves better than what we currently have, and this may be true to some degree. And yet, what we currently have has been created solely by mankind. And ultimately, folks, we deserve what we create. You see, we have collectively created the situation we now find ourselves in. And it may be somewhat painful for people to admit that, but it's true. This situation has been created solely due to our collective failure to face the shadow that lies within, and through the state of inaction we have chosen to remain in. In the modern world, we find ourselves enslaved to our current society due to our own attitude and our own actions. So ultimately, mankind finds itself in this present predicament simply because it is what we deserve. But we have before us, right now, an opportunity to change everything, simply by adjusting our perspective of things. Mankind has spent far too long in the grip of corruption. Too long have we placed the value of paper over the value of people. Too long have we allowed ourselves to be subject to a debt-based economy, allowed ourselves to be slaves of big pharma and corporate greed. Too long have we allowed our servants to control the mansion. Over the past few generations, mankind has been abused and downtrodden almost beyond belief. We've allowed the rise of organisations such as Monsanto to corrupt and destroy the food chain on this planet under the guise of acting in our best interests. Through our constant inaction, we've allowed our government employees, under the guise of acting in our best interests, to continually and dramatically remove our rights, to disempower the common people, to enslave the world to fictional debt, to sell sickness to the world, and to profit from the despair and frailty of those whom They are sworn to serve.